Welcome to today's deep dive. We're really glad you're here. Usually when we approach learning a new skill, especially like something that involves caretaking or nurturing, we really just want a manual.
Oh, absolutely. We want a definitive step-by-step textbook.
Right. We want the rules laid out clearly. Like if A happens, do B.
Feed this exact amount at, this exact time of day.
Exactly.
We crave that algorithm. It provides this comforting illusion of control over something that is, at its core, inherently wild and unpredictable.
Yeah, we really operate on the assumption that following the recipe perfectly just guarantees the perfect result every single time.
But it rarely works out that cleanly in practice.
No, it doesn't, because then you step into the messy, dynamic reality of actually raising a living creature.
Right.
Whether that's a new puppy or maybe a temperamental houseplant, or in the case of our deep dive today, a tank full of incredibly fast-growing fish.
And suddenly that rigid textbook you've been clinging to, it might actually be the very thing holding you back from, like, achieving the best possible outcome.
Exactly. And our source material today might seem pretty niche at first glance. We're looking at a highly specific journal entry.
Very specific.
Yeah, it's titled Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 253, The First Stripe of Adult Patterning. And it was published literally today, May 11th, 2026, by a really dedicated aquarist named Ang.
And just the title alone, Part 253, that really signals the depth of the material we're dealing with here. Fish isn't just someone casually passing through a hobby. This is someone who is relentlessly documenting, observing, and tracking daily biological changes over a really long period.
Which is pretty rare to see.
It is. And there's a specific kind of wisdom that only emerges from that level of sustained, granular attention.
I totally agree. And, while this might seem on the surface like just a specialized log about a home aquarium, our mission today for you listening is to uncover the much larger lessons hidden in the water.
There's a lot more going on here than just fish care.
Right. We're looking at biological development, challenging conventional wisdom, and exploring the delicate, often counterintuitive balance of, nurturing optimal growth. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the focus of Ang's journal entry is a specific batch of fish currently being raised. They are Turkana Jewel Cichlid fry.
Scientifically known as Hemichromis exul.
Right, Hemichromis exul.
Yeah.
And just to be totally clear, a fry is just the technical term for an infant fish.
Yes, exactly.
And these specific fry are incredibly young. They are just over a month old.
Which is, practically the starting line of their lifespan.
Rarely out of the gate.
Right. At 1 month old, they are these microscopic, rapidly developing little organisms. Their sole biological imperative at this point is usually just to, survive the day.
Basically just don't get eaten.
Exactly.
But Ang makes a primary observation in this journal entry today that completely disrupts that expectation.
Yeah, it's quite a surprise.
Even though these Turkana Jewel Cichlids are just over a month old, Ang notices they're already developing a horizontal bar, like a stripe, right along the side of their bodies.
And what's fascinating here is that this stripe is not just some random fluctuation in their coloration.
Right, it's not just a trick of the light.
No, not at all. In the biological development of these specific cichlids, that horizontal bar is the definitive, undeniable first sign of their adult patterning.
Wow.
It is the absolute hallmark of their mature form starting to express itself on a physical level.
I'm honestly struggling to understand how that is even biologically possible. A 1-month-old fry developing adult traits just feels like a massive misallocation of resources.
It does seem that way.
Like imagine a human toddler suddenly needing a tailored suit or showing up to daycare with a 5 o'clock shadow. It's just weird.
That's a hilarious image, but honestly, it's a really accurate comparison.
Right. Developing adult pigmentation, which mature fish use for claiming territory or attracting a mate, that takes a tremendous amount of biological energy.
It's expensive, biologically speaking.
Extremely. So why would an infant organism prioritize this adult suit when it should just be focusing on growing larger?
Well, that analogy hits at the exact heart of the metabolic math problem happening inside these fish right now.
Yeah.
You're essentially looking at a biological anomaly. Usually, a young organism puts every ounce of its metabolic currency into basic structural growth.
Just getting bigger.
Right, building bone, building muscle, simply getting too big to be eaten by a predator.
Which makes sense.
But to see adult traits manifesting while they're still so firmly in the juvenile stage, it indicates that their development is essentially running on an extreme fast track.
Wow. So they are just zooming through infancy.
Exactly. Their bodies have somehow secured enough energy to fund both the basic structural growth and the adult patterning simultaneously.
Which is wild. But okay, if they're maturing this incredibly fast on a physical level, growing into that mature suit so quickly, it really makes me wonder about their behavior.
Right. Does the behavior match the body?
Exactly. Are they acting like adults, or are they still behaving like typical infant fry?
Well, Aang noted that their behavior is fundamentally shifting in tandem with their physical appearance.
Really? How so?
Aang specifically observed that at feeding time, these tiny juveniles have totally abandoned the passive behavior you would normally expect from fry.
Oh, interesting. Because usually fry just kind of wait around.
Exactly. They usually just wait for food to drift down to them in the water column.
Mm-hmm.
But not these guys. They are aggressively, eagerly rushing to the surface the exact moment it's time to eat.
Oh, wow. Just picture that. The water just boiling with these tiny striped fish practically jumping out to get their meal.
It's a very intense response.
And as a caretaker, seeing that kind of frantic, hungry behavior, I feel like that creates a massive psychological trap.
Oh, it's a huge trap.
Because you see them rushing the surface, acting like they're absolutely starving. And your human instinct, which is just driven by empathy, is to grab the food container and keep dropping flakes in.
Of course, because we associate feeding with providing good care.
Right. If they're hungry, feed them. That's the manual.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, that very human instinct highlights the absolute core dilemma of fish keeping.
Okay. What is that?
And honestly, it's the dilemma of arguably any biological caretaking. It's this constant, really dangerous tension between providing enough nutrients to fuel rapid early growth and the incredibly easy pitfall of systemic overfeeding.
Yeah, let's pause there for a second, because I think people listening might assume that overfeeding a fish just means the fish gets a little chubby.
That's a very common misconception.
But in a closed ecosystem like a home aquarium, overfeeding is a literal death sentence, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's a chemical hazard before it's even a physical one.
How does that work?
Well, when a caretaker gives in to that temptation and dumps extra food into the tank, whatever the fish don't eat immediately falls down into the substrate.
The gravel at the bottom.
Right, and it just begins to rot. That decomposition process triggers a massive spike in ammonia.
Oh, right, ammonia.
And in a closed loop of water, ammonia is highly toxic.
Yeah.
It burns their gills, suffocates them, and it can literally crash the entire biological filtration system of the tank overnight.
That is terrifying. And, even if they do manage to eat all that extra food, we're talking about the internal physiology of an infant fish here.
Right. They are still physically tiny.
Yeah, a 1-month-old fry doesn't have an expansive elastic stomach like a human being does.
Not at all.
Their digestive tract is essentially just this tiny, delicate tube. So if you constantly overload it with food, just because they're, aggressively begging at the surface, you run into severe mechanical issues.
That's exactly it. The biological machinery simply cannot process the sheer volume.
It just backs up.
Exactly. When a fry's digestive system is overloaded, the food actually begins to ferment in the gut before it can be properly broken down by their enzymes.
Oh, gross.
It causes bloat, which directly leads to fatal digestive blockages. So the caretaker's generous instinct to keep fueling that rapid growth actually becomes the single biggest threat to the organism's survival.
This leaves Aang in a pretty precarious position then.
Yeah.
You've got these hyper-aggressive, fast-growing Turkana Jewel Cichlids practically screaming for food at the surface.
Right, demanding fuel.
And they clearly need massive amounts of fuel to sustain the early development of those adult stripes we talked about.
They do.
But if you feed them to match their aggression, you either poison the water with ammonia or you fatally rupture their tiny digestive tracts. How do you even begin to solve that biological math problem?
Well, Aang decides to step completely outside the standard manual.
Okay.
Based on watching them rush the surface and recognizing that severe threat of overfeeding, Aang decides to run an intervention to test the boundaries of their metabolism.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because Aang decides to let these rapidly growing fry fast for one entirely full day.
No food at all.
Literally zero food for a full day. And the journal entry explicitly acknowledges that this is not standard practice. Aang notes that fasting is, quote, not really ideal for young fry.
Yeah, it completely violates the standard literature on raising baby fish.
I would think so.
The conventional guidance is universally focused on constant small meals. The textbook rule is to feed fry 3, 4, maybe even 5 times a day.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. But the prevailing theory assumes that because their metabolisms are just raging to support early growth, any interruption in caloric intake will permanently stunt their development.
Wait, I really have to push back on this, because everything we know about biology says infancy requires constant calories for brain and body development.
That is the assumption, yes.
So starving a baby creature that's in the middle of a massive growth spurt, that just sounds incredibly dangerous, not optimizing. How is withholding fuel from a 1-month-old fish safe in any capacity?
That's a great question, and it really comes down to the difference between sheer volume and biological efficiency.
Okay, explain that.
Constantly keeping the digestive tract full, even in a rapidly growing fry, creates a bottleneck. If food is constantly entering the system, the gut never actually has a chance to fully clear.
So it's just a constant traffic jam.
Exactly. The digestive enzymes are constantly depleted, and the gut lining never gets a resting state to, repair itself.
Makes sense.
So you end up with this sluggish equilibrium where the fish is eating constantly, but the actual absorption of the nutrients begins to drop off significantly.
Oh, I see. It's like taking a high-end computer processor and constantly overclocking it with new tasks.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right, because eventually the cache gets full, the system overheats, and performance just drops entirely.
Yes.
The system literally needs a reboot to clear the cache so it can process information efficiently again.
And that is the exact mechanism at play in their tiny digestive tracts.
Wow.
By introducing a deliberate pause, this one-day fasting allows their digestive systems to completely empty out.
Clearing the cache.
Exactly. The digestive organs rest. The enzymes replenish. And when Ang observed the results of this highly unconventional test, the practical reality completely defied the textbook.
What happened?
The fast made the fish significantly hungrier, highly active, and far keener to feed the very next day.
Because their bodies were biologically primed for intake again.
Precisely.
The system was wiped clean. So when food was finally reintroduced after that fast, their guts were just hyper-receptive.
Yes, they weren't just passively eating the food. They were extracting and absorbing every single micronutrient with absolute maximum efficiency.
That is amazing. So the fast wasn't depriving them of growth at all.
Not at all.
It was optimizing how they actually utilized the fuel they were given.
Observation triumphs over the established rule. Ang didn't just accept the assumption that a fast would stunt them.
Right.
Ang tested the boundary, observed their specific physiological response, and realized that a strategic pause was actually way more beneficial than a constant stream of input.
Which leads directly to the formulation of a brand new, highly customized care routine.
Yes, it does.
Let's look at the final decision Ang settles on, because I think it perfectly balances all these conflicting demands we've talked about. The growth, the water quality, and the human psychology.
It's a very elegant solution.
Based on watching them rush the surface, seeing those early adult stripes, and observing that hyper-efficient nutrient absorption after the fast, Ang institutes a very specific regimen.
And what is it?
From this point forward, the juvenile cichlids are fed twice a day, but Ang strictly enforces a one-day fast.
And in the journal entry, Ang synthesizes 3 distinct, really powerful benefits to this customized routine.
Let's hear them.
First, it keeps the fry fundamentally healthy. By forcing that digestive reset, Ang completely eliminates the risk of bloat and internal blockages that just plague captive fish on constant feeding schedules.
Because the gut is given time to manage its own mechanics. Okay, the second benefit is the one that really challenges everything we assume about growth. Ang states that this routine actually actively accelerates the physical development of these juveniles.
Which is counterintuitive, right?
Totally. They're being fed less often than the manual suggests, but they're growing faster, and they're pushing out those adult patterns even more prominently.
Because, as we saw, optimization yields better results than sheer volume.
Wow.
That hyper-absorption state created by the fast means the biological machinery converts a much higher percentage of the food into actual structural growth and pigmentation.
It's just so much more efficient.
Exactly. And the third benefit Ang highlights serves as a really vital safety mechanism for the ecosystem itself.
The hard, non-negotiable boundary.
Yes.
Because by instituting a strict fasting day and a set feeding limit, Ang protects the water quality from those deadly ammonia spikes.
Crucial for their survival.
But more importantly, I think, it protects the fish from the caretaker's own empathetic instincts.
Oh, absolutely.
It solves the biological problem inside the tank, and it totally solves the psychological problem of the human standing outside the tank holding the food container.
It entirely removes the temptation to react to their frantic surface begging.
Yeah.
When the rule is established based on specific, observed efficiency rather than just an emotional response, the entire system stabilizes.
So, what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive? Why did we just spend our time deeply analyzing the feeding schedule and digestive enzymes of a 1-month-old Turkana Jewel Cichlid?
It's a fair question.
We did this because Ang's journal entry is a masterclass in the power of active, customized observation over passive compliance.
It really is.
Look at the steps Ang took. There was no blind reliance on a forum post or a textbook rule that declared, never fast baby fish.
No. Ang looked at the specific living organisms in that specific tank.
Exactly. The unique accelerated growth, that early stripe was noted. The aggressive behavior at the surface was factored in.
And then Ang tested a boundary that probably felt pretty uncomfortable and counterintuitive.
Yeah, passive caretaking is just applying a universal average to a specific situation and hoping it survives.
Right, hoping for the best. Active engagement requires letting the unique reality of the situation dictate the rules, even if it means rewriting the manual entirely.
You really have to be willing to look at the data right in front of you. If the system is overloading, you don't keep flooding it just because the manual says so.
No, you introduce a pause, you clear the cache. And this raises an important question when we step back from the aquarium and look at the broader mechanics of how we operate.
And this is exactly what we want to leave you with today. We really want you to take this concept of biological efficiency out of the fish tank and apply it to the structures of your own life.
Think about your own routines.
Yeah, we all operate under ingrained manuals, rules about how we're supposed to work, how we consume information, how we constantly strive for growth.
The default assumption is almost always addition.
Always. If you want to grow faster, you need to consume more, work more, add more fuel to the engine.
It's exhausting.
But if careful, daily observation can prove that a rapidly growing organism actually accelerates its maturity when you stop feeding it. What processes in your own life are currently choking on constant input?
Where are you experiencing sluggish equilibrium because you never allow the system to clear?
Exactly. Consider the possibility that addition isn't always the trigger for optimal development. Sometimes a deliberate, strategic subtraction, like a fast from input or just a pause in the endless workflow, is the exact catalyst your system needs to hyper-absorb the nutrients that are already there.
A chance to reset?
Yeah. You might find that stepping away from the constant feed is exactly what allows your own adult patterning to finally emerge. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Keep questioning the standard guidelines. Trust your own observations, and we'll see you next time.